Chapter 22 Riding with the Devil. Alex and her friends sat on the floor in the back of the van, while 3 thugs sat across from them, and Lex sat on a crate in the middle. The henchmen in the front of the van looked much less rugged. They were clearly Lex's more brainy pawns. The van was not designed for comfort. The tires vibrated with every imperfection on the road, like a phonograph needle on a scratched record, and small bumps tossed the passengers around roughly. "What happened to my mom?" Lina asked nervously as soon as the van started moving.
"The same old thing,"
Lex said, waving his hand dismissively.
"Arlene was dying for the skag."
Lina looked down at her hands as tears welled up in her eyes.
"Don't be so sad, sis,"
Lex said indifferently.
"I know she had been clean, popping that prescription stuff instead, but she was about as happy as a dog living off kale chips, and I left her enough smack to stay there a while."
Eric put his hand on Lina's shoulder supportively. He knew Lina's mom, and he also knew what it was like to have very weak parents. Cookie, who had been eyeing Lina with suspicion earlier, reluctantly reached out and held Lina's other hand. Lina did not object. Alex took this in with amazement. The closeness of Cookie and Lina didn't make sense. Earlier at the mall, Alex had thought that Lina was pretending to forgive Cookie out of curiosity. When that theory failed, Alex then decided that Lina must have found religion and that she forgave out of duty. But now it was clear that Lina was sincere. She had warned Alex and Kara time and time again to never trust Cookie, but she was unable to follow her own advice. Now it was clear that Lina had always cared deeply for Cookie, and she had just been waiting for Cookie to come around. Alex stared at their interconnected hands and felt separate from her friends, alone. She wished she was holding Kara's hand. "How did you find us?" Eric demanded of Lex. Lex smiled.
"Well, I'm embarrassed to say that it was more difficult than it should have been. Think of it. Lina and Arlene just scrambled the letters in their last name, and she thought she could get away with it. Yet she almost pulled it off. I didn't have any leads to where you kids were relocated, but I did have one card to play. I found an obscure way to contact Lina's mother. I still had her PayPal name. So every month I sent her around $800 from the PayPal user SocSecAdmin, about the same amount the real Social Security was loading onto her bank account. I predicted she would think that either the government was making a mistake or that she was getting a second payment for taking care of Lina, and that she wouldn't report it because people don't look a gift horse in the mouth. I varied the payment amount every month by a few pennies. My boy up front had hacked into several major banks, and we could see millions of account numbers and money amounts going in and out of accounts. After all this time, only one account had deposits that exactly matched the deposits I had sent to your mom. Tracking that account to Leesburg was elementary."
Lex then sat back and smiled, but he quickly lost his mirth when the teens didn't seem to appreciate his brilliant scheme.
"It's a shame how fate always conspires to keep us apart, Lina. Siblings should stick together,"
Lex said, as he looked over the 4 friends one by one.
"But we don't have much use for any more experimental subjects. Your friends here hardly seem worth the expense, but we can't have them blabbering around either. Too bad one of them got away."
Lina was startled. She must have thought that Lex meant to let her friends go, but then she saw how cold his eyes became. Like attentive dogs, the 3 thugs picked up on their master's mood instantly, and their hands moved towards their weapons in case Lex meant to execute the children right then in the car on a whim. Alex and Cookie both pushed their backs against the van door as if they could somehow put more distance between themselves and what suddenly seemed like imminent danger. Lina moved her body in front of Cookie to shield her, while Eric did the same for Alex.
"Relax, I haven't made any decisions yet,"
Lex said, laughing.
"Besides, Eric, what makes you think I would hesitate to kill you?"
Comments like that did not help the teens to relax.
"Hey boss,"
came a voice from the front passenger seat.
You might want to hear this before you plan anything irreversible. I've been plugging the info from these kids' IDs into the FBI database, and the results are interesting. Go ahead,
Lex said patiently.
Turns out the blonde is the daughter of Caleb Clifford, from Roberts and Clifford, the team of lawyers that put you away,
He said excitedly.
And the brunette is the daughter of 2 scientists who specialize in Kryptonian biology and culture.
Lex's eyes nearly popped out of his head.
You gotta be shitting me.
The man up front shook his head defensively, as if there was any chance he'd pull his boss's chain. Lex whirled his head back to face the teens with a crazy grin.
What are the odds? Congratulations, kids. We might have a use for you after all.
The van was speeding down the highway at 70 miles per hour, despite the rush hour, forcing the driver to weave from lane to lane. Kara was flying 50 feet overhead. Worries flooded her mind as she followed the van. She was worried that someone might see her, even though she was surrounded by the dark night sky. She was worried that if her cousin tried to call, she would be out of range. She was worried that the van would stop, and then maybe she would have to act. She was worried because the van was lined with lead panels preventing her from seeing inside. These criminals were clearly prepared for Superman. What hope did she have? She had no experience using her powers, and she had no experience dealing with these sorts of people. She tried not to worry so much. Worry would lead to panic, and her friends needed for her to be level-headed. It helped that she could hear what was going on inside of the van. The windows were all closed, and the engine was loud, but as long as she stayed close above, she could pick out voices through the roar of the wind and road. She needed to fly low to make out what people were saying, and if it meant that someone glimpsed her in the sky, so be it. She needed the reassurance of hearing her friends' and sisters' voices to keep her calm and focused. Kara heard when Lex threatened her friends. She could even hear the coldness in his voice. She was prepared to jump in front of the van right then, but fortunately, Lex changed his mind quickly. Then the passengers in the van stopped talking altogether. Kara could hear her friends whispering in the back and deeper voices murmuring in the front, but now they were too quiet even for her ears to track words. A few minutes later, the van took an exit from the freeway and headed down a quiet, poorly lit road. Kara slowly descended until she landed on top of the van, light as a feather. Now she could hear the whispers clearly. Nobody inside noticed the extra passenger stealing a ride on top. Kara laid on top of the van as flat as she could, thinking she could ride unnoticed the rest of the way. A small box on top of the van forced Kara to lay sideways, but it also gave her something firm to grab onto and steady herself. At first, she thought that the box was plain black, but there were tiny holes on the sides. When she looked inside the box, she was mesmerized by sparkling lights that moved around like fireworks. But she still felt dizzy even when she closed her eyes. For a moment, she laid there, and she forgot where she was. She forgot that she was on the van or that her friends were in danger. She had heard kids at school describe the effects of marijuana. That was what this felt like. She remained mesmerized for several minutes when suddenly her cell phone rang. She woke from her daze suddenly as if being splashed by water while in a pleasant dream. Kara nearly fell off the roof and then took into the air like a bird startled by a cat. She fumbled her cell phone, then managed to recover it before it hit the ground, but only by dropping her skirt. The striped wool garment was dragged by the wind past her feet, like a kite after the string is broken. She considered rescuing that small piece of her humility, but she was deathly afraid of letting the van out of her sight. At least today she was wearing panties. That was decent enough for now, she decided, and she was better off without a loose-fitting skirt flapping around while she flew, distracting her and making noise. Kara floated up above the van before answering the phone. "Hello?" she shouted through the roar of the wind.
"Kara?"
Eliza said.
"Can you hear me? I couldn't reach your cousin. I'll keep trying, but I don't know. I know you don't feel ready for this, but please, please don't let anything happen to Alex. Can you hear me?
Yes, Kara shouted through the gale-force winds. And I won't! Kara stared down at the roof of the van and that mysterious box which had messed with her mind a moment ago, when her head was only inches away. But that was not the real purpose of the device. What had Lex said about it? When telepaths were in the vicinity, the box prevented them from using their powers. Kara bit her lip. The obvious thing to do was destroy it, but she was afraid of the consequences. Maybe there was an alarm built into the box that would go off if it was damaged. Maybe if Lex knew that Lina and Eric had their powers again, he would kill them. Then again, maybe if Lina could read Lex's mind, she could plan an escape. And maybe if Eric could push his feelings, he could distract them. Any action she took might save her friends, or it might backfire. Kara wanted for someone else to decide. But Kara was stuck with this decision. It was hers alone. Carefully, Kara focused her eyes. Waves of heat pierced the air, descending to the roof of the car. She controlled the beam with care, ensuring that it was not so hot or diffused that it burned the top of the vehicle. Her fierce stare slowly overheated the device inside the box until sparks and a puff of smoke finally signaled the device's demise. Then she waited and listened and bit her lip hard enough so she could taste her blood. She knew her small act of destruction would not be nearly enough to save the day. If Superman could not help her, she would need to do a lot more, and she was completely willing. All she wanted was for someone to tell her what to do, and that was not going to happen. For now, all she could do was be patient and be ready when the next opportunity to act would finally present itself. The thugs looked up when something bounced on top of the van, but went about their business of monitoring the prisoners a moment later, as if nothing had happened. Lina wished that she could read their thoughts, and she concentrated hard, but it was hopeless. Lina had not felt this helpless in years. Certainly not since the last time that Lex had held her and Eric hostage. Now, it felt like they had never escaped. She felt as powerless as she had felt when she was only 9 years old, and Lex had kept her in his orphanage back in Midvale. The orphanage looked pleasant enough when the government inspectors dropped by, but there was nothing pleasant about the constant labor, the experiments by mad scientists, or the forced isolation. Puppy mills provided their dogs with more emotional support than the orphanage provided their wards. As bad as life in Midvale was for Lina, she was the lucky child because she was the master's sister. Lex had always told her that other children, like Eric, had it much worse, but Lina had always felt especially cursed, knowing that the evil they were all enduring was connected to her. She felt responsible because Lex was her brother. She had felt much luckier when Superman had rescued her and returned her to her mother. With a lot of therapy, she had slowly learned again what it meant to be loved. Her mother's love was as much of a torture as a comfort. Her mom had a host of emotional problems and was always teetering on the edge with her addiction. Lina was more like the parent in their relationship with her mom, but after the hell that Lex had trapped her in for 2 years, Lina felt blessed to have her mom back in whatever state she was in. She had felt like her life had meaning again. She had felt free. Now, she didn't quite know how to feel. Lex had once taught her to lose all hope. And now, she felt her hope failing her yet again. Lina looked at Eric, whose contagious feelings had always grounded her, but now the space between them felt empty. He looked back at her, and Lina could see the dread in his eyes, and that made her shiver. He had gone through the same nightmare she had gone through, and she knew her eyes must have looked like his. Knowing that they were being thrust back into Lex's hell again was horrifying, but she knew they would quickly learn their place again. She almost looked forward to when her heart would be numb again to the inhumanity, to the loss of hope, to the loss of giving a shit, because once that finally happened, She knew that even the flames of hell would become bearable. Lina and Eric had been through this before, and they knew the best thing to do with Lex was to keep their mouths shut and just let him talk and never react, no matter how outrageous the shit that came out of his mouth. Unfortunately, Cookie and Alex did not know this strategy. They had never been broken. They actually thought they could argue with Lex. They thought there was a point in fighting. Fighting was the worst thing they could do. It might even get them killed. Cookie had always been an emotionally strong girl, but now she was shaking uncontrollably in fear. She had started her captivity by wisely holding her tongue, but then she foolishly summoned the audacity of telling Lex to go fuck himself when he had demanded compromising information about her father. She should have relented or at least lied, and then he would have ignored her. Instead, she now found herself sitting on the lap of one of Lex's henchmen with duct tape over her mouth and fighting off hands that groped and tormented her body. Alex felt deeply sorry for Cookie, and she never thought that that was possible even one day ago. But Cookie's friendship stock was skyrocketing today. Now Alex was shedding tears for Cookie because at any moment Lex might give the word, and the henchman would dutifully rape Leesburg's mean girl in the van in front of everyone. Alex could not just sit there and watch that happen, even to someone like Cookie. A foolish plan was forming in her mind. She was thinking that if these men were so distracted by the molestation going on in front of them, maybe Alex could sneak up and grab one of their guns. Wait, was that really what Alex was thinking? Yes. Lina suddenly realized that the thoughts in her mind were not her own anymore. Something happened, and that could only mean that Kara had destroyed the device on the van. That meant that Kara was still there with them. Lina could feel her. She could also feel Eric's anger and the frustration exploding from his soul. His feelings were distinct from her own. She could sense Cookie's despair, and she could even sense Lex's satisfaction at putting Cookie in her place. Lex did a little mind reading of his own. Lex saw the defiance blooming in Alex's eyes, so he turned his attention to her.
You think I'm cruel, young lady?
He asked Alex with a polite tone that was now more ominous than his angry voice.
Well, I don't have much choice, do I, when people don't give me the respect I deserve? But I'm not always so harsh. I can be magnanimous to those who please me. Just ask Lina here.
Lina looked away, shaking her head angrily. Contradicting Lex was never smart, but she couldn't let her friends think even for a second that she was on his side.
Okay, don't ask her,
Lex said, feigning surprise and disappointment.
It's very unfortunate when people don't appreciate the gifts I have given them, but she's family, and well, we all have to be patient with family. You, however, are not family.
Alex could not miss that subtle threat. What do you want? Lex smiled.
Oh, nothing much. Just a few small questions. Like, how do you know my sister? There must be a common thread that brings so many teenagers relevant to my interests together in one place, who are all connected to either me or Superman in some way. Tell me what sorts of things you know about my nemesis. Tell me how I can contact your parents.
Alex sneered at Lex, but one look at Cookie's situation helped her keep her smart-ass comments to herself. Instead, she stayed silent. It was her only defense. Lex stood up and was perfectly steady on his feet despite the rough ride of the van. He towered over Alex.
Cat got your tongue? Okay, how about an easier question? Who was that girl who got away? Quite a dynamo, that one. You sure seemed eager for her to get away.
Alex was literally cornered, and she didn't want to follow Cookie's fate. Lex was so confident that he left his groin an easy target. Alex felt her fear turning to anger, and she was building the courage, or foolishness, to take the bait.
Oh, stop this bullshit!
Lina yelled out suddenly, trying to get Lex's mind off of her friends.
You must have bigger plans than harassing a bunch of teenagers.
Lex was provoked by Lina's insolence, but he was predictably pleased by the opportunity to rant on about his brilliant schemes. He towered over Lina, feigning an attack with his pointed shoe, and then he grinned when Lina covered her face with her arm.
I've always spoiled you too much,
he said with a dangerously playful tone.
But of course you are right. By this time tomorrow, we will have our revenge on Al-Qaeda, and we will win over the hearts and minds of America at the same time.
What?
Alex asked in shock. You want to help America?
Yes, my dear,
said Lex, as though he had always been misunderstood.
Unlike your lame government that just wants to build democracies and forgive those savages, or that simple-minded Kryptonian who would rather save kittens in trees than do what is necessary, I will put an end to this war on terror in one day. I will do what needs to be done.
You, Lina started, then swallowed, barely able to comprehend what Lex was thinking. You are going to nuke them?
Of course,
Lex said.
It's about time someone did more than talk about it. We've lost thousands on 9/11, and now thousands more in needless street-to-street combat. Truman had the right idea all those years ago. What is the point of stockpiling thousands of weapons and not even threatening to use them?
You're going to fire nukes from our country's military bases? Lina said, shaking her head at how insane it sounded.
Bravo, little sis.
Lex praised Lina's insight, never considering that she might have read his mind.
You are going to help me get the launch codes. I trust you see the sense in our plan, But if you don't, surely you don't want to see your friends suffer.
Superman will stop you, Alex said defiantly. Lex glared at her.
And that is what you want. Really. Americans always need to be dragged kicking and screaming to their salvation, but no, Superman will not be getting in our way. We've made sure that he is halfway around the world in North Korea, rescuing thousands of our other enemies in a factory fire. He'll be too busy to pay attention to what is going on around here, and we are not afraid of the Man of Steel. If he shows up, we are prepared to greet him with this special little gun.
Lex reached behind his servants and pulled out a bazooka-sized weapon.
You see, we leave nothing to chance.
Lex, said a voice from the front as the van decelerated. His tone immediately wiped away Lex's smug smile.
What is it?
Lex demanded.
A tree has fallen across the road,
the voice replied as the van rolled to a stop. Lex crouched behind them in front of the van and took in the scene. A pair of large trees had fallen completely across the road, blocking off traffic going in both directions. Only a few cars were stopped in front of their van, so he deduced that the trees had fallen just a minute or so ago.
Trees don't just fall down in calm weather,
Lex observed. His face was grim as if the conclusion was obvious.
Turn the van around.
The van started to back up, but quickly, cars were approaching from behind them. A small barrier separated the lanes going in opposite directions. A truck with high clearance might have been able to cross over, but the van would get stuck if it could even get its front wheels over.
It might be him, boss,
said one of the lackeys, as if Lex wasn't already way ahead of him.
It can't be,
countered a voice from the front.
He's making a statement live on television, praising both Koreas for cooperating during the tragedy.
Maybe,
Lex said doubtfully, preferring to believe his own suspicions over a news broadcast.
Keep them inside,
he instructed. Then he tucked his special weapon under his shoulder and opened the van door. The teens and tough guys alike crowded by the windows and looked out. Some people from other cars were gathering to discuss their common traffic problem, but when they saw Lex wielding the large gun, they rushed for cover. Lex searched the night sky, not sure what to look for. After a moment, he caught a glimpse of something. He saw a dark spot in front of a cloud, and it seemed to move. Lex wasn't sure what it was, but Lina knew. Lex did not hesitate. Lina yelled out in a panic as Lex pulled the trigger, and a glow of green light flashed through the darkness, dispersing in a wide trajectory like that of a shotgun. Lex heard something fall in the woods, and he began running in that direction. A few of his men stepped out of the car to follow Lex, and when they did, the 4 teenagers rushed out behind them before anyone thought to stop them. "Kara!" Alex yelled out, running as fast as she could, a few paces ahead of everyone else. Lex stopped as he took the situation in. The kids were running towards him, then past him towards the woods. His incompetent men were now trying to catch them. And now, approaching from the distance, were the alarms and red and blue light flashes from approaching police cars.
Fuck.
Lex cursed and then instructed.
Just shoot the bitches, then get back into the van.
The teens all heard the instructions, and they ran even harder, hoping to outrun the bullets. Except for Lina, she stopped running and turned around, yelling,
Stop! I'm the one you need. I'll help you if you let them go.
Lex stared at her, then grabbed her roughly by the hand. Finally, he said,
Forget them. Get back to the van.
The men holstered their guns and turned around, while Lex roughly dragged Lina back into the van. Lina could sense that her friends had paused at the tree line to look back at her. She could not see them, but she knew that they saw her, just before Lex pushed her into the van, and they ran off to find Kara. The van started up and nudged 2 cars out of its way. Then, the van rammed into the top of the tree, tossing its occupants around like football players when a play starts. Then, it rammed again. And again. Lina heard something grinding under the tires as the van bucked like a horse. Finally, the grinding and bucking stopped, and the van picked up speed. Lina wiped away a tear as she looked through the rear window, imagining she could still see her friends and still sense their minds. She tried not to think of what might happen to her. She tried to think of the lives she might be saving by choosing to go with Lex. But her thoughts kept coming back to the reality that she might never see her friends again. And even if she did, would she still be the same person after Lex gets his tentacles into her mind